Step 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 8 is the test of our newfound humility. There are people who say the fourth step is where the rubber meets the road in recovery. I'm not going to disagree with them, but I feel like step 8 is where the rubber really meets the road, because our purpose is to achieve freedom from the guilt that we have carried. We want to look the world in the eye with neither aggressiveness nor fear. Are we willing to make a list of all persons we had harmed to clear away the fear and guilt that our past holds for us? Our experience tells us that we must become willing before this step will have any effect. So in step 8, we're making a list and becoming willing. We're not making the amends yet. And in working with newcomers, this is something we have to remind people about, because some people go into step 4 with fear and trepidation because they know that 8 and 9 are down there. And so we help people to stay right where you are. Stay where you are. By the time you get there, you'll be ready. But step 8 isn't making the amends. Step 8 is made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And I had issues in the early days with how often the word all shows up in these steps. I'm like, well, I mean, all, really all? Made a list of all persons? I probably can't even remember all the people I've harmed, especially since I was a blackout user, and then become willing to make amends to them all? Good grief. But I did want to clear away the fear and guilt that my past held for me. And by the way, it isn't just persons, it's also institutions, organizations. As I said earlier, to be an active addiction is to be a liar, a thief, a con artist. That's what addiction is. That's who we are. And so it isn't just people, it's also institutions sometimes. The 8th step is not easy. It demands a new kind of honesty about our relations with other people. The 8th step starts the process of forgiveness. We forgive others, possibly we are forgiven, and finally we forgive ourselves and learn how to live in the world. By the time we reach this step, we have become ready to understand rather than be understood. We can live and let live easier once we know the areas in which we owe amends. It seems hard now, but once we've done it, we will wonder why we didn't do it long ago. But it is important not to do it too soon. And I have seen people who tried to do it too soon, and they do harm. Not just this 8th step, but the 9th step. Because we have so much guilt and shame when we get clean and sober. We know the harm we've done. We don't know all of it, and we're still kind of fuzzy in the early days, but certainly the people who are closest to us, we know what we've done. And they will usually help us to know if we've missed anything, if we've left anything out. It is not a good idea when you're 2 weeks sober to run to your family and say, I'm so sorry for all the harm I've caused, and I did this and I did that, because they're probably going to sit you down and say, oh, you forgot a few things. I have a friend whose mother did that when they got to the 8th and the 9th step, and when they called the mother to actually do the amends, Mama was waiting with a list of her own. And it was okay. We need some real honesty before we can make an accurate list. We need to have gotten honest with ourselves. I mean, I need to know who I am. I need to know what the masks were, how I was fronting and profiling and all that. So what is harm? One definition of harm is physical or mental damage. Another definition of harm is inflicting pain, suffering, or loss. That's a big one, or loss. The damage may be caused by something that is said, done, or left undone. Harm can result from words or actions, either intentional or unintentional. The degree of harm can range from making someone feel mentally uncomfortable to inflicting bodily injury or even death. I had a friend years ago who volunteered with me in some work we did in the prisons. We taught nonviolent conflict resolution training. It was 3 days, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. And it's a powerful thing to watch people choose to be fully human in a place that is not designed to affirm your humanity. It was wonderful work. But this particular friend began to do this work as a volunteer because of her own history. They had several kids and they all turned out fine except for one. And they couldn't figure out where they went wrong with this one. And they hadn't gone wrong. But we all have our own paths to take. And sometimes the hardest thing we can do as a loved one, as a parent, is to watch people make their own mistakes and their own bad choices. That is why I keep recommending Al-Anon and Nar-Anon for persons who love people who are in their active addiction. And he just turned out to be the horrible, horrible human on every level. He, in addition to being an alcoholic and an addict, he didn't want to work. He was a womanizer. He beat his wife on a regular basis. He didn't take care of his kid. He was just everything you don't want your child to be. That is what he was. And they prayed. She said, I prayed, my husband prayed, we prayed, God, whatever it takes, God, please save my child. He beat his wife to death in a blackout. He beat her to death. And he was sentenced to a long time in prison. And even in prison, he didn't get it right away because the disease had him by the throat. And even though he wasn't using, see, he was still walking around in that unmedicated mess that was his soul. But he finally did get into recovery behind the walls. And he was finally able to face who he'd become and what he did. He became a totally different human being in 12-step recovery, in prison. And he ended up not serving the entire sentence that he would have served because he was a completely changed man when he came back out. This woman prayed, whatever it takes, save my child. And for him, it took taking a life, the life of someone he loved, the mother of his children. He found this recovery behind the walls. Many of us have difficulty admitting that we caused harm for anybody because we thought we were the victims. I mean, addicts are good at that. And by the way, nobody can gaslight you like an addict. We are grandmasters. You hear me? We are grandmasters of gaslighting. We can have you believe in that it's all you. Really, I mean, look at it. Avoiding this rationalization is crucial to the 8th step. We must separate what was done to us from what we did to others. We got to cut away to the justifications. We got to let go of our own victim status. Some of us feel that we only harmed ourselves. I was one of those people. I was never in the streets with my stuff. It was at home. And at the end, it was at home, in my basement, by myself, me and my dog. I'm not bothering anybody. Leave me alone. Why y'all bothering me? Why is everybody tripping? I am not hurting anybody. The kid was gone off to the military. I'm not bothering anybody. But I was. For people who were counting on me to show up in my fullness. See, I didn't know that people were waiting on me to show up in my fullness because I actually have something to give to the world. And the world was expecting me to give it. And I'm sitting there in my victim status, feeling sorry for myself, holding on to my past and all that was done to me. And and that was real. But it's past. And so until I could let go of my precious victim status, I couldn't move forward. So this step is about doing the legwork to get ready to repair the wreckage of our lives. It does not make me a better person to judge the faults of somebody else. And I do my best today not to do that. When I catch myself, I stop myself. And I'm going, really, look who's talking. Pot calling the kettle black, right? I got my own issues. That's all I can do to take care of my own stuff on a daily basis. And by take care of, I mean keep offering it back to my higher power, since I know I can't fix myself. But when we write this list in the 8th step, what we're saying is we know we caused harm. We can no longer deny that we caused harm. We admit that we hurt others directly or indirectly through some action, lie, broken promise, or neglect. So I had to have my employer on my list. My employer was counting on me to show up to be the really good employer and contributing person they had hired many years before. They were counting on me to be that. And also there's this thing called a contract, right? Like paycheck, I get this and I do that. We make our list, and for an awful lot of us, it's coming right out of our 4th step, because those same people we had the resentments against tend to be the people that we have done the most harm to. We face the list honestly. We openly examine our faults so that we can become willing to make amends. Remember, this step is about becoming willing to make amends. There were some people on that list that I hoped I never saw again, so I didn't have to make the amends. There were some people on that list that I'm thinking, actually, I think they owe me more amends than I owe them, but I'm gonna go ahead and put them on here anyway, because my sponsor says so. There were some people on the list that I thought, okay, this is not a biggie, I can do this. But the amends is about so much more than saying I'm sorry. So we'll get into that when we talk about the actual amends making. Right now, we are making a list and becoming willing to make amends to them. Many members mentioned their parents, spouses, children, friends, lovers, other addicts, casual acquaintances, co-workers, employers, teachers, landlords, and total strangers ended up on their list. That's in the big book. We may also place ourselves on the list because while practicing our addiction, we have been slowly killing ourselves. I heard it put this way back in the 80s. It's called suicide on the installment plan. I haven't heard anybody use that expression in a long time, but it's kind of seared into my soul. My active addiction is suicide on the installment plan. It's day by day, step by step. It is a slow and miserable way to die. And it is really hard for the people who love us to watch it happen. As with each step, we must be thorough. Most of us fall short of our goals more often than we exceed them. At the same time, we cannot put off completion of the step just because we're not sure that our list is complete. It's never really finished. And it's interesting to me, in this 20 years, how people have been brought to mind that it wasn't like I thought about them and just didn't want to put them on the list. I mean, honestly, I hadn't even thought about it. That is a wonderful thing about working with others. Working with others helps us so much to recover, because as other people are doing their work and all of a sudden things, I think, oh, I had forgotten about that. But we have some maintenance steps at the end that help us to deal with that. So stay tuned for that. The final difficulty in working the 8th step is separating it from the 9th. Projections about actually making the amends can be a major obstacle both in making the list and in becoming willing. We do this step as if there were no 9th step. We do not even think about making the amends, but just concentrate on exactly what the 8th step says. Make a list and become willing. The main thing the step does for us is to help build awareness that little by little we are gaining new attitudes about ourselves and how we deal with other people. And this is critical because this is so hard for some people. Before they make the first amends, they are out there, they're in the 8th step, making the list and thinking about how painful it's going to be or how hard it's going to be. They're just future tripping about what making this amends is going to look like. And so our job as other people in the fellowship and as sponsors is to help them stay in this, making a list and becoming willing. You don't have to do this today. As a matter of fact, as I said earlier, sometimes we try to make amends too soon, and it's just not helpful. It really isn't. For one thing, people need to get used to us being clean. They need to get used to us being in recovery, get used to seeing us, excuse me, healing before they even want to hear anything from us. Like I said earlier, sometimes people are so sick of us, they're not really willing to hear from us just yet. So right now we're making a list, but we're understanding that this is about relationships. It's all about relationships. Listening carefully to other members share their experience about the step can help us, can help relieve any confusion we have about writing the list. Our sponsors can share with us how the 8-step list, just writing the list and becoming willing, worked for them. As a result of the step, we receive a new freedom that can end isolation. Because remember, we are very isolated people. Even when we're around people, we are isolated by the addiction. As we realize our need to be forgiven, we tend to be more forgiving. At least we know that we are no longer intentionally making life miserable for people. The 8th step is an action step. And like all the steps, it offers immediate benefits. When I made my first 8-step list, I thought it was going to be a lot longer, and it wasn't really that long. Part of it is because I was a solitary user for the most part. It wasn't as long as I thought it was going to be. I mean, I hadn't really done that much harm to as many people as I thought, but I had done great harm to the people on that list. So it wasn't as many in quantity, but the quality was significant. I didn't have a lot of close friends, so the few I had, I mean, they were badly hurt by my behavior in the beginning and then my absence, because there just came a point where I just withdrew. I mean, I knew I was a mess up. I knew I could be embarrassing, when I was high. I knew I didn't really want to be around people all that much because, people can be a real buzzkill. They can. So it was just easier for me to stay home in my basement and do what I did by myself. So my absence was also painful to the people who cared about me, not knowing if I would really show up if I said I was going to. It may seem like a little thing compared to beating your wife to death, but all of this harm, it's all part of the fabric of what just makes life miserable for so many people. The collective harm that is done makes the world an angry and mean place. So the 8th step is an action step. And once we've actually taken this step, we are now free to begin actually making the amends in step 9. But we're going to do that with some company. And we will talk more about that when we get to step 9.